You're asking my wife to leave. Jordan's voice cut through the luxury dining room like a blade, just as the room fell silent. Welcome, story lovers. Where are you tuning in from today? Drop your city in the comments below and tell. Do you think this was just a misunderstanding, or something far more deliberate? In today's story, a beautiful brown-skinned professor walks into a birthday dinner, is humiliated, and is removed from her reserved seat. But 5 minutes later, the arrival of a limited edition Tesla shatters every illusion of power in that room. Who owns the restaurant? Why did they target her? And what happens when quiet dignity meets corporate justice? Stick around, because this story builds to a powerful reckoning you won't see coming. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, so you never miss our latest true-to-life stories of dignity, downfall, and redemption. Let us know where you're watching from, and stay till the end. This seat wasn't just a seat. It was a line they should have never crossed. Alina Moore stared at the ivory envelope resting on the edge of her kitchen counter, its golden embossed lettering catching the soft morning light like it had something to prove. It wasn't the kind of invitation she was used to. She'd received plenty in her career: academic conferences, lecture tours, honorary panels. But this one was different. It was social, exclusive, gilded in a way that only the ultra-wealthy dared to be. It wasn't just any birthday party. It was the 6th birthday of Madison Langford, the daughter of Cynthia and Richard Langford, hedge fund elites, and partners in several real estate ventures with Jordan, her husband. The event was being held at Vivre Blanc, the city's most coveted restaurant, a place where reservations had wait lists longer than some Ivy League admissions, and where the menu didn't list prices, only symbols of prestige. Jordan, ever, the silent player in luxury circles, had mentioned the party casually over dinner 2 weeks ago. They asked if we'd attend. I said yes for both of us, he'd said between bites of salmon and market greens. Alina had raised an eyebrow. Both? It's just a formality. You'll enjoy it, he replied with a wink, as if showing up was as effortless as saying yes. But Alina wasn't one for formality, not the kind dripping in quiet codes and silent judgments. She didn't grow up learning which fork went with which course, and she had no interest in pretending. Yet, as she glanced at the invitation again, something in her chest tightened. She wasn't nervous. She was aware of how often rooms like these took inventory of skin tone before credentials. Still, she decided she would go, not to perform, not to please, but to occupy space. Jordan wouldn't be arriving until later. He had meetings lined up all day, and Alina saw no reason to wait. She would go early on her terms. She chose her outfit deliberately, a flowing white slip dress that skimmed her curves without apology, minimal jewelry, no designer handbag, no statement shoes, just grace and intention. Her hair, a cascade of soft coils, was swept back in a low bun. Her presence would speak for itself. The Uber pulled up to Vivre Blanc's polished entryway just past 3 o'clock. The midday sun bounced off the restaurant's glass and chrome facade, casting reflections that made the place look like a temple of modern privilege. A valet in a pressed charcoal uniform opened her door, his eyes flickering just briefly as he registered her. Not in a hostile way, more in that default scan, the kind that calculated whether a person fit. She stepped out anyway, chin high, each stride measured but unbothered. Inside, the space was as extravagant as the legends claimed. Marble floors gleamed like mirrors beneath her sandals, while a massive chandelier resembling a frozen firework hung from the ceiling, casting warm, flattering light on an already curated crowd. The scent of truffle oil and chilled champagne floated in the air, subtle but assertive. At the hostess podium stood a young blonde woman with a tight bun and a tighter smile. Her name tag read Amber. Alina approached and smiled politely. "Good afternoon. There's a birthday party for Madison Langford. I believe my name should be on the guest list. Alina Moore." Amber gave her a perfunctory nod and flipped through a leather-bound reservation book, the kind that screamed tradition despite everything in the room being optimized for Instagram. Her eyes scanned the pages twice, then paused. She looked up. "I'm sorry, I don't see a reservation under that name." Alina's smile didn't falter. "It should be there. My husband, Jordan Moore, confirmed it directly. We were invited by the Langfords. He even reserved a specific table. Table 3 by the garden window." Amber's mouth tightened just slightly, the kind of micro-expression Alina had seen 1,000 times before, caught between protocol and perception. She leaned in to whisper to another hostess before turning back. "Would you mind waiting just a moment? I'll have our manager assist you." Alina stepped to the side, the soft music and conversation around her continuing like she was invisible. She wasn't offended. Not yet. But she was taking mental notes. 5 minutes passed, then 10. She watched as guests arrived, most of them white, all of them dressed in a way that signaled effortless money. A woman in red Louboutins was ushered in without question. A man in linen gave the staff a single nod and was led to a private lounge. Then from across the room, a tall woman in a silk emerald dress entered like a storm wrapped in satin. Blonde, tanned, and confident, she swept toward the hostess stand. Amber straightened. "Ms. Langley, welcome. We have your favorite table. Ready? Table 3. Alina's heart thumped. She turned toward the hostess. "Excuse me," she said, keeping her voice even, "but that's the table my husband reserved for me." Amber blinked, her expression unreadable now. "I'm sorry, ma'am. There must have been a mix-up. Ms. Langley is a regular here. That table has been reserved for her for weeks." Alina looked at her, then at the manager who had just walked up behind the hostess, a man in his 40s with slicked-back hair and a custom-fit navy suit. His name tag read, Gareth Simmons. He gave Alina a glance that hovered just a little too long, his gaze not quite condescending but assessing, like she was an unexpected complication in his otherwise controlled ecosystem. "I'm sorry," Gareth said with a half-smile, "but the table is no longer available. We can seat you near the kitchen. It's quieter there." Alina's spine straightened like a blade. Her voice, when it came, was soft but steel-lined. "You're offering me the kitchen while someone else sits at the table that was reserved in my name?" Gareth shrugged. "We do our best to accommodate our guests, but sometimes mix-ups happen." The implication wasn't subtle. In his world, she was the mix-up. She glanced around the lobby again. No sign of Jordan, no allies in sight. Her fists clenched by her sides, not out of rage, but out of restraint. She was a guest in a place her husband helped build, yet she was being treated like a mistake in the system. And just as she opened her mouth to respond, just as Gareth gestured to security with the casual arrogance of a man who thought he could handle situations like this, the faint purr of an electric engine echoed outside the restaurant, subtle, sleek, and unlike any car the valet had handled that day. The doors parted again, all heads turned, and the air in Vivre Blanc began to shift. The sound of the electric engine had barely faded when the front doors of Vivre Blanc glided open with mechanical perfection, revealing the man who'd just stepped out of the limited edition Tesla parked at the curb. But he didn't stride in with entitlement or theatrics. No, Jordan Moore walked with the controlled precision of a man who understood power not as something to be flaunted, but something to be felt. He wasn't dressed like the flashy elite who clung to brands like armor. Instead, he wore a charcoal gray suit cut so perfectly it whispered wealth without ever needing to scream it. His skin glowed bronze beneath the ambient chandelier light, and his presence seemed to reach the room before his voice ever did. That was the thing about Jordan. He never needed to announce himself. The room always did it for him. But when his eyes locked onto Alina, standing near the exit, her arms folded, her jaw clenched, something shifted in his expression. It was subtle, just a narrowing of the eyes, a small flex of the jaw, but it said enough. He crossed the lobby in swift, calculated steps, his attention fixed only on her, as if the rest of the glittering space had fallen away. "You've been standing here this whole time?" he asked, voice low but lined with tension. Alina didn't answer. She didn't need to. The answer hung thick in the air between them, as visible as the discomfort rippling through the guests who now watched the exchange with guarded curiosity. She tilted her head toward the hostess stand. They said there was no reservation. They gave the table to someone else. Jordan turned slowly, deliberately, like a man preparing to dismantle something carefully constructed. His gaze settled on Gareth Simmons, who had taken a step back, as if he could somehow vanish into the decor. You gave away the table, my wife reserved. Jordan's voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It held the weight of expectation, of quiet dominance. It made people stop mid-sentence. Gareth cleared his throat, his smile returning like a reflex. There seems to have been a misunderstanding, Mr. Moore. We didn't realize this. Guest was your wife. And there it was, the wordless confession embedded in that pause. This guest, the woman you thought didn't belong. Alina watched the moment with a strange detachment, as if watching a stage play she had seen rehearsed too many times. The difference now was the stakes. The room didn't know who Jordan Moore was, not fully. Most saw him as a wealthy investor, yes, but what they failed to realize was that he was the primary investor behind Vivre Blanc, owning a quiet 58% majority. He had chosen to remain invisible in operations for this very reason, to see how people acted when they didn't know. They were being watched. You didn't realize this was my wife, Jordan repeated, as if tasting the absurdity on his tongue. And tell me, if she hadn't been my wife, would her reservation have magically reappeared? Gareth's mouth opened, but no words followed. Amber, the hostess, looked down at her hands. The nearby guests shifted in their seats, unsure. If they were watching a social faux pas, or the beginning of something deeper, it was simply a miscommunication, Gareth offered, trying to salvage authority that had long since evaporated. We had a last-minute request from a valued guest. Which guest? Jordan asked. He already knew the answer, but the question was a blade. Gareth hesitated. Ms. Langley. Veronica Langley, Alina said quietly. The same. Woman who's been on 3 diversity panels this year and still looked me over like I was housekeeping. Jordan's mouth twitched, but he didn't look at her. He stepped forward instead toward Gareth, who instinctively moved half a step back. You gave away my wife's reserved table to a woman who walked in without a reservation, simply because she looked like your version of a VIP, Jordan said, voice razor-sharp now. And then you offered my wife a seat by the kitchen, like she was lucky to be let in at all. Silence wrapped around them like a fog. Even the pianist had slowed his melody into something faint and cautious. The mood in the restaurant was no longer one of indulgence and champagne sparkle. It had turned brittle, uneasy, as if everyone was suddenly aware of the fragility of civility when class and color collided. Gareth tried again, his smile now stiff, his forehead slick. Mr. Moore, of course, had we known. You didn't need to know, Jordan cut in. You only needed to respect the reservation, the name, the human being standing in front of you. And then, for the first time since his arrival, Jordan turned to the room. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't pound the floor. But somehow everyone leaned in just the same. This is exactly why I stayed in the background, he said. To see how this place truly operates. I've heard the rumors, seen the patterns, but today, you gave me proof. You thought my wife didn't belong because she didn't come dressed in sequins or European arrogance. You made a judgment, and you buried her name under your bias. Veronica Langley, seated now at table 3 with a crystal flute in hand, lifted her chin and offered a smirk that barely disguised her discomfort. This is getting dramatic, she said loud enough to be heard, forcing a laugh. I'm sure we can all be adults about this. Jordan didn't look at her. He was still staring at Gareth, who looked like he was unraveling by the second. My name, Jordan said evenly, is Jordan Elijah Moore. I am the majority shareholder of this establishment, And the woman you tried to diminish just now is not only my wife, she is Dr. Alina Moore, tenured professor at Westbridge University, published scholar, and the only person in this room who doesn't need to prove she belongs. With that, he turned to Alina and offered his hand, not out of chivalry, but solidarity. She took it. Slowly, deliberately. Gareth stammered something behind them, but the moment had passed. The damage was done. And as they walked together, toward the center of the room, toward the very table that had been stolen from her, Alina didn't smile. She didn't glare. She didn't even flinch as they passed Veronica, who stared down at her drink, the sparkle in her voice now duller than the ice melting in her glass. First impressions had lied, but now the truth was starting to echo, and no one in that room would ever forget what it sounded like. The clink of crystal stemware and the low hum of ambient jazz resumed as Jordan and Alina crossed the dining floor, but it was only surface noise. Behind the sound, every eye in the restaurant was tethered to their steps. The velvet hush that had swallowed Vivre Blanc in the wake of Jordan's declaration hadn't lifted. It had only shifted. It was now the silence of restraint, of whispered judgments and sideways glances, of people pretending to sip from their glasses while their eyes trailed the couple like drones. Table 3, Alina's table, sat by the garden window, just as promised in the reservation. The glass behind it framed the restaurant's wisteria-covered courtyard like a painting, serene and curated, but nothing about the moment felt serene. At the table, Veronica Langley still sat like a queen, unwilling to vacate her throne. She didn't rise. She didn't even blink. She simply crossed her legs, swirling her drink as though the room still belonged to her. Jordan stopped just short of the table, his hand never leaving Alina's. "Ms. Langley," he said coolly, "I believe you're in the wrong seat." Veronica looked up slowly, her smirk unchanged, but her voice now edged with deliberate innocence. "Oh, I had no idea this table was such a point of contention. I assumed it was first come, first served." She paused to sip her drink, then added, "But if it means that much to her," Alina interjected sharply. "This was a matter of principle. But to you, it's always just been convenience wrapped in entitlement." Her voice didn't tremble. It cut, measured, and crisp, every syllable a slap against the porcelain politeness Veronica wore like a shield. A few guests near the table flinched. One older man in a designer scarf turned fully in his chair to watch. A younger couple near the bar exchanged wide-eyed glances. Veronica let out a breathy laugh and stood slowly, as if rising was her gift to the room. "Well," she said, brushing the front of her dress as though it had been sullied by proximity, "I suppose we're all learning our place today, aren't we?" Jordan didn't answer. He merely stepped aside, holding the chair for Alina, who sat down without a word. The manager, Gareth, had reappeared by then, hovering awkwardly by a decorative pillar, his composure bleeding through his cuffs. "Mr. Moore," he said, "if I may." "You may not," Jordan replied without looking at him. "Not here. Not now." Gareth recoiled as if slapped, swallowing whatever apology he was about to attempt, and instead turned toward the bar, motioning for the headwaiter with a desperate flick of his fingers. The room, though attempting to move on, couldn't escape the pull of the confrontation. Conversations now carried a stilted edge. Laughter sounded forced, and waiters drifted like ghosts, present but unsteady. Alina, seated in her rightful chair, surveyed the space with cool precision. She had spent a lifetime mastering the art of appearing unbothered in rooms designed to exclude her. She knew what it meant to keep her back straight while people questioned her right to exist in a space they had already claimed. But this was different. This was not a university boardroom or a publisher's gala. This was a room full of people who thought money gave them the license to erase her, and now they had been made to sit in the discomfort of her presence. Jordan didn't sit. Instead, he remained standing behind her chair, his posture straight, arms loosely folded, watching as Gareth approached once more. this time flanked by two security guards in discreet black suits. The sight of them was enough to stir murmurs from the corners of the room. "You've got to be kidding," Alina muttered under her breath, her eyes narrowing. "Mr. Moore," Gareth began again, feigning authority he no longer possessed. "We've had a request from another guest to de-escalate the tension. Perhaps it's best if we relocate Dr. Moore to another section of the restaurant. Let me stop you right there," Jordan interrupted. "Are you suggesting you move my wife because your guest is uncomfortable with her sitting at her own reserved table?" Gareth hesitated. "It's merely a courtesy suggestion, sir." At that moment, something snapped. Not loud, not visible, but real. Alina stood slow and deliberate, her hands resting lightly on the edge of the table. Her voice, when she spoke, was quiet, lethal. "So, to be clear, after denying my reservation, offering me a seat by the kitchen, handing my table to someone who came in after me, and watching her publicly mock me in front of your guests, you think the solution is to remove me?" She looked at the two security guards, then back at Gareth. "You want them to drag me out too? Because I promise you, I've survived worse things than this velvet-lined circus of false civility." Her words echoed, biting through the air like smoke through silk. One of the guards shifted uncomfortably, clearly unsure whose side he was meant to be on. Gareth paled. "Dr. Moore, please understand." "No," Jordan said, stepping beside her now. "You understand. From this moment forward, you and I are no longer speaking as manager and investor. We are speaking as two men on opposite sides of a lawsuit." The word lawsuit seemed to ring off the crystal glasses, bouncing around the room with an electric hum. Several heads turned openly now. Someone at the next table dropped their fork. Gareth took a full step back, his face twitching between alarm and calculation. "This isn't necessary." "It became necessary the moment you tried to erase her," Jordan snapped. "The moment your bias became company policy. The moment this entire place decided that whiteness equals priority and everything else is a seat near the kitchen." The silence returned, this time thick with guilt, and no one reached for their drinks, no one spoke. Even Veronica, now seated 2 tables away, sat motionless, her jaw tight, her gaze averted. Alina breathed in, slow and steady, as if reclaiming every molecule of oxygen the room had tried to deny her. She didn't want to cry, not because she felt weak, but because this was not a moment for tears. This was a moment for reckoning. She sat down again, this time not just in a chair, but in a position of absolute clarity. She didn't need anyone's apology. She needed accountability. Jordan placed a hand gently on her shoulder, not in comfort, but in solidarity. Then he turned to Gareth, who looked like he wanted to disappear into the carpet. "You have 1 hour, Jordan said. "Clear your schedule. We're calling an emergency meeting with the board." He paused. "And don't even think about touching the reservation log. We already have a copy." With that, he sat beside his wife, their presence now a declaration in itself. The room exhaled slowly, collectively, but no one returned to normal, because everyone now understood. This wasn't just about a table. It never was. This was about power, and who gets to decide who deserves to sit. Outside the grand facade of Vivre Blanc, the late afternoon sun cast elongated shadows across the valet line, turning luxury vehicles into polished silhouettes beneath golden light. The air smelled faintly of lavender from the nearby courtyard, and citrus from freshly uncorked champagne within. The restaurant stood like a fortress of exclusivity, stone, glass, and silence. No one inside knew that something was already shifting, just beyond the doors, the kind of shift that doesn't announce itself with sirens or spectacle, but with precision, inevitability, and the quiet whir of innovation cloaked in luxury. That sound came in the form of a low, whispering hum as a Tesla Roadster, obsidian black and gleaming like a predator in the sun, turned the corner and pulled into the private drop-off lane. No horns, no revs, just quiet, deliberate presence, the way true power prefers to move. The valet stepped forward automatically, clipboard in hand. but stopped short when he saw who stepped out. Jordan Moore, in a navy three-piece suit bespoke and tailored to perfection, emerged from the driver's seat with a calm that bordered on regal. He didn't rush. He didn't scan the area like a man unsure of himself. He simply straightened the sleeves of his jacket, locked the car with a flick of his fingers, and strode forward, polished leather soles whispering against the stone. The valet gave a tight nod, nearly bowing. Jordan didn't acknowledge him. His eyes were already trained on the entrance and what lay beyond it. He had received the text 20 minutes earlier. A single line from Alina. "They gave my seat to someone else. I'm standing at the door." He didn't reply. He didn't need to. His presence was the reply. As Jordan crossed the threshold, the atmosphere inside shifted like a barometer before a storm. Conversations faltered. Glasses clinked in hesitation. The staff stilled, and a subtle current of unease cut through the air-conditioned calm. Jordan didn't make eye contact with anyone as he walked past the main bar, past the hostess stand where Amber stood frozen, past Gareth, who had re-emerged from a hallway with a flush rising from his collar. He saw none of them. His gaze found only one thing: Alina, still seated at table 3, framed by the wisteria-draped window behind her, chin high, face composed, dignity unbent. He reached her in less than 10 seconds, but the silence had stretched long before that. In those seconds, people whispered names, questions passed beneath breath, and rumors began to draft themselves into reality. Jordan leaned in, placed his hand on Alina's shoulder, and pressed a kiss to the crown of her head. Not theatrical, not showy, but deliberate. She reached up to touch his wrist in response, her fingers lingering. The room watched, breathless. Then Jordan turned, rising slowly, pivoting like a general surveying a battlefield he hadn't chosen, but would certainly finish. "Which one is Gareth Simmons?" he asked, voice low but cutting through the stillness like a scalpel. Gareth, who had inched backward behind a marble column, now had no choice but to step forward, clearing his throat. "I'm Gareth, Mr. Moore." Jordan's expression didn't shift. "Ah, so you're the man who decided to humiliate my wife in front of a room full of strangers." Gareth hesitated, hands wringing behind his back like a schoolboy caught. "Lie. Mr. Moore, there's been some confusion, I assure you." "Was there confusion when her name was in the reservation book?" Jordan interrupted, one brow raised. "Or was the confusion only introduced when a white socialite walked through the door and you decided she looked more appropriate for the table?" The word appropriate hung in the air like a blade, daring someone to flinch. No one did. Gareth tried to speak, then swallowed. "I didn't realize she was your wife," he said finally, weakly. "You didn't need to realize anything," Jordan said, voice rising now, not in volume but in resonance. "All you needed to do was honor the reservation, respect the customer, and not judge a woman based on the absence of diamonds around her neck or designer logos on her heels." The silence was now not just awkward but oppressive. People were sweating into their suits. Veronica Langley, seated one table away, had gone deathly still, her glass of rosé untouched. She looked away as Jordan's gaze swept over her. "And you," he said, addressing her directly, "sat at a table with another woman's name on it, knowing full well it wasn't yours." Veronica raised her chin, summoning her signature smugness. "I didn't know the details. The staff seated me." "The staff follows the tone of the room," Jordan shot back, "and the tone was set by your entitlement." He turned again to Gareth. "You've not only embarrassed my wife, you've embarrassed my name, my investment, and this brand. You thought she was invisible because she walked in with grace instead of arrogance. And now the only thing invisible is your authority." Gareth's mouth opened, then closed. A man beside him, possibly another manager, began to move forward. But Jordan raised one hand. "Stop. We're not moving on as if this was a minor inconvenience. This was an act of public erasure, a choice to prioritize appearances over integrity." His voice dropped lower, like thunder about to strike. "But if you thought this was just a social embarrassment, let me educate you. He pulled his phone from his pocket, tapped once, and held it up. "This," he said, turning the screen to show the reservation confirmation in bold black font, "is digital proof that Table 3 was booked under Alina Moore. Confirmed. By your system. Time-stamped. Verified. You don't just owe her an apology, you owe her a reckoning." The statement didn't need amplification. It pulsed through the marble floor and up through the polished glass, reverberated in the wine glasses and bounced off the ceiling. People didn't know whether to look away or lean in. Veronica stood without a word and left her table, trying to hold on to grace as she did, but everyone saw the tremor in her hands. Gareth stepped back slowly, nodding as if he had only just remembered how. "We'll fix this, of course," he muttered. "No, Gareth," Jordan said, stepping closer. "I will fix this. You, however, should prepare to explain to the board why this restaurant may not have a future under your management." And with that, he turned, took his seat beside Alina, and finally exhaled. The Tesla might have arrived without a roar, but its owner had left a crater in the room, a crater where silence had once been mistaken for weakness. The tension inside Vivre Blanc didn't dissipate after Jordan took his seat. It thickened. Like a storm that refused to break, it clung to the walls, seeped into conversations, and shadowed every silver fork lifted to trembling lips. Guests tried to resume the rhythm of luxury, ordered second glasses of wine, murmured about business and charity galas, but none of it rang with conviction. They were in the presence of something they rarely witnessed, power dismantling politeness, a system cracking at the seam. And Gareth Simmons, the manager who once ruled the floor with smooth glances and curated charm, now looked like a man walking across glass barefoot. He lingered at the edge of the dining room, pretending to take calls on his headset, eyes flicking to the corner where Jordan and Alina now sat. Table 3 reclaimed, redefined, and radiating the kind of dignity no chandelier could replicate. Jordan didn't speak for several minutes. He simply sipped the still water in front of him, his hand resting loosely on the table, while Alina sat poised beside him, her posture unwavering, her eyes calm, but burning with something deeper. Not anger, no, something more surgical. Precision. Memory. A quiet fury that remembered every breath Gareth had stolen from her dignity. Jordan set his glass down. "We need the reservation log," he said, not turning his head. Alina looked up. "You know they'll say it was deleted or overwritten." He nodded. "That's why I made sure the IT department forwarded me all cloud syncs and internal edits from this morning. The system auto-archives every 30 minutes. His voice didn't rise, but his words carved through the tension like piano wire. "I want to see exactly what name got replaced, and when." Gareth approached then, tentative and pale. The smirk was gone, replaced with the quiver of a man who had suddenly realized his position wasn't earned. It was inherited through proximity and arrogance. "Mr. Moore, I'm sure we can sort this out without escalation. As I said earlier, this was a regrettable oversight, not a reflection of our values." Jordan turned slowly. "What are your values, Gareth?" The manager blinked. "Sir?" "Your values," Jordan repeated. "Are they listed somewhere in your hiring manual, or are they just practiced through selective hospitality?" Gareth's mouth opened and closed like a faulty hinge. "This isn't how we typically operate." "But it is how you consistently operate," Alina cut in, her tone razor-sharp. "This isn't the first time I've heard complaints about Vivre Blanc. I just never thought I'd become one of them." Before Gareth could protest, Jordan reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He opened it slowly, like he had all the time in the world. "This," he said, flattening it on the table, "is the auto-generated edit log for today's reservations. The original file had Table 3 Moore Alina, 3:00 p.m. That entry was edited at 2:48 p.m. and replaced with Langley Veronica." Jordan looked up. "So tell me, Gareth, how did that happen?" Gareth stared at the paper like it was written in a language he didn't speak. I don't recall making that change. Of course not, Alina said, eyes locked on him. Because remembering would mean taking responsibility. Gareth swallowed hard. It's possible the hostess. Amber doesn't have admin access, Jordan cut in. Only management can override VIP reservations. The implication settled like ash on Gareth's lapels. The man was unraveling, strand by strand, his posture shrinking beneath the weight of consequences he never imagined would come for him. Perhaps I misunderstood the instruction, Gareth said weakly, or thought the reservation was tentative. There's a confirmation number, Jordan replied, tapping the paper. Time-stamped, sent directly from your system to my assistant and forwarded to Alina. Alina leaned in slightly, her voice dropping to something soft but lethal. Do you have any idea how exhausting it is to fight for space you've already earned? To walk into rooms you helped build, only to be told you don't belong in them? Gareth didn't answer. He couldn't. His silence was a confession in itself. Across the room, the ripple effect of the confrontation had grown legs. Patrons were pulling out phones, pretending to scroll through emails while sneaking photos. A woman whispered into her husband's ear, and he nodded grimly. It was no longer a private humiliation. It was a public reckoning. And Vivre Blanc, for all its curated excellence, was beginning to look like a cracked mirror, refined, but splintered. Beneath the surface, Jordan folded the reservation log and tucked it back into his jacket. Then, with calculated calm, he reached for his phone again and pressed a button. A moment later, the restaurant's assistant general manager, a nervous woman named Rachel with dark-rimmed glasses, appeared beside their table. Rachel, Jordan said smoothly, please inform the board that I'm calling an emergency session for 7:30 p.m. Every senior staff member is required to attend, including Mr. Simmons. Rachel's eyes darted between Jordan and Gareth. Yes, sir. And in the meantime, he added, I want the full week's reservation log audited. Any edits, any deletions, any names that appear more than once or were mysteriously displaced. Gareth opened his mouth again, but Jordan held up a finger. Don't speak. Just prepare. Gareth retreated like a man walking backward off a cliff. His exit was wordless but no less dramatic than a scene from a courtroom drama. He had come into the day expecting to play host. Now he was a liability in his own house. As the manager disappeared behind a glass partition, Alina finally allowed herself a breath. Not relief, not victory, but grounding. She glanced toward Jordan, who sat beside her with one arm draped across the back of her chair, his face unreadable. You didn't have to come, she said. He turned his head. You shouldn't have had to stand. And that was the difference. In a world that measured women like Alina in margins and conditions, Jordan didn't elevate her. He recognized her. Her worth wasn't a debate. It was a fact, and that table? It had never been about food. It had been about the place, about being seen, about being counted, and now the restaurant would count the cost of its oversight. A server approached the young, visibly nervous, and set down 2 fresh glasses of wine without speaking. He didn't meet their eyes, but before he turned away, he placed a folded napkin discreetly on the corner of the table. Alina opened it slowly. Inside, written in looping pen strokes, were 4 words that said everything. You weren't the first. Jordan read it over her shoulder. He didn't flinch. Then it's time, he murmured, to make sure you're the last. At precisely 7:30 p.m., while the last course was being served to the oblivious elite still lingering in the dining hall of Vivre Blanc, a very different kind of gathering was taking place behind a frosted glass door at the end of a narrow corridor marked Staff Only. It led to the private boardroom, rarely used, always pristine, a space designed for power brokers to review numbers over espresso, not to face judgment. But tonight, judgment was the only thing on the menu. The room itself was coldly elegant. High-backed leather chairs encircling a polished obsidian table, a discreet projector embedded in the ceiling, and a built-in wine bar that no one dared approach. This wasn't a dinner meeting. It was a reckoning. Jordan sat at the head of the table, hands clasped, posture relaxed in the way only men with absolute leverage could afford. Alina was not in the room. This wasn't her battle to fight anymore. It had already been fought. Now, this was Jordan's war to finish. Across from him sat the board, 6 executives and stakeholders in tailored suits, some with silver hair, others too polished to be seasoned, but all fidgeting slightly under the weight of what they sensed coming. Gareth Simmons entered last. He moved like a man walking into his funeral, clutching a leather portfolio he hadn't opened all evening. His seat remained suspiciously unassigned, a subtle power play from Jordan, who let the omission hang in the air like a dare. Gareth cleared his throat and took the farthest empty chair without being invited, drawing a sidelong glance from one of the partners. The tension was immediate, measured, almost tactical. Jordan broke the silence first. Before we begin, let me state for the record that this emergency meeting has been called under Clause 12 of the Operating Charter, gross misconduct requiring executive review. His voice was calm, but every word hit like a gavel. You've all read the reports, but tonight we're going to talk about what the paper doesn't say. One of the older board members leaned forward, steepling his fingers. Jordan, I understand the situation was unfortunate, but are we certain this warrants such an escalated response? Gareth has been with us from the beginning. He helped build the Vivre Blanc experience. Jordan tilted his head, a faint smile, tugging at the corner of his mouth. And what exactly is the Vivre Blanc experience? Is it about ambiance and foie gras? Or is it about curating comfort for the right kind of guests? The silence after that question wasn't agreement. It was fear of the answer, of complicity, of what Jordan might already know. Another member, younger and more digitally inclined, cleared her throat. We've seen the reservation logs. The override is clear. But how can we prove intent? Jordan tapped a button on the black touchpad in front of him. The lights dimmed, and the projector descended with a soft, mechanical hum. Intent, he said, isn't always a signature on a document. Sometimes it's in a pattern. A screen blinked to life behind him, displaying a spreadsheet, color-coded, time-stamped, and damning. Over the past 6 months, there have been 17 instances where minority guests were either moved, delayed, or mysteriously not found in the system. In 12 of those, their reserved tables were reassigned to last-minute arrivals who happened to be white. In all 17 cases, Gareth had override access within the time frame of the change. The data was irrefutable, cold, clean, and quiet. But in that silence, a storm began to form in the faces around the table. One man shifted uncomfortably. Another leaned back in his chair like retreating would somehow protect him. Gareth's jaw twitched. With all due respect, he said tightly, you're drawing a lot of assumptions. There are dozens of reasons. To make a reservation, VIPs, high-profile guests, special requests, none of which, Jordan interrupted, justify systemic bias. His voice, still level, now carried a distinct edge. This isn't about one guest. This is about a culture you fostered, one where courtesy is currency and prejudice is policy. He turned back to the board. And let's not pretend this is invisible to your bottom line. Every one of those displaced guests spent less money, left early, and in several cases, never returned. You're not just unethical. You're inefficient. Gareth's face was pale, but there was a flicker of fire behind his eyes, a last-ditch scramble for footing. You think you can lecture me about efficiency when you've barely shown your face around here? You hide behind ownership while we deal with the day-to-day mess. You wouldn't understand what it takes to maintain an elite brand like this. The room stiffened. The air crackled. Jordan leaned forward, elbows on the table, his smile now gone. You're right. I don't understand how you maintain elitism by deleting a professor's name from a reservation list. Or how do you think class is defined by complexion? but I do understand leverage. And as of 30 minutes ago, I filed a motion with our legal team to begin proceedings for your termination under breach of ethical standards. A collective inhale swept through the boardroom like wind through dry leaves. Gareth stood abruptly, fists clenched, voice shaking. You're going to throw away a decade of loyalty because I made one decision under pressure. Jordan stood too, taller, steadier, and suddenly much colder. I'm not throwing anything away. I'm cleaning house. He held out a document, thick, stapled, and signed. Here is your official notice. Your access is revoked. HR will coordinate your exit, and I suggest you speak to your own legal counsel before making further contact with any Vivre Blanc staff. Gareth looked around the table, but no one met his eyes. His authority had evaporated. He wasn't just fired. He was erased by the very silence he once used as a weapon. As Gareth stormed out of the boardroom, the door clicking shut behind him like a final verdict, Jordan turned back to the others. We rebuild from here: transparency, equity, actual accountability. That's not optional. It's the future of this brand. One of the older board members finally nodded. Agreed. It's long overdue. Another added, it's bold, but necessary. Jordan didn't smile. He simply sat back down, eyes steady. Then we start tonight. Outside the room, the hum of luxury and laughter continued, unaware that the restaurant they thought they knew had already begun to burn, and, from its ashes, something else entirely would rise. The morning after the boardroom purge, the headlines arrived like a swarm, swift, relentless, impossible to ignore. Exclusive: Vivre Blanc rocked by internal scandal. Racial bias in reservation system exposed. The article had leaked before dawn, fed by someone on the inside who had likely recorded parts of the board meeting. It didn't matter who, did it? What mattered was that the truth was no longer contained behind closed doors. It had spilled into the public arena, and now the carefully polished image of Vivre Blanc, once synonymous with exclusivity and high taste, was being chewed apart by the very people who had once praised it. Jordan hadn't planned for the press leak, but he didn't flinch when it happened. He welcomed it. What Gareth and his silent enablers had tried to keep hidden with perfume and politeness had now become undeniable, and when truth becomes undeniable, it becomes uncontrollable. Within 12 hours, 5 major influencers who had tagged the restaurant on social media within the past year posted apologies for supporting a space rooted in silent exclusion. The Yelp page was flooded not with angry rants but personal stories, some calm, some devastating, all united by a shared pattern. My father wore his best suit and still got seated near the kitchen, wrote one user. I always thought it was just bad luck, another said. Now I know it wasn't. Even worse for the board was the statement from Alina. It came at noon, posted without fanfare on her university's blog, where she was listed as a visiting ethics lecturer. No dramatics, just a plain, powerful statement. When you have to fight to be seen in a place you helped finance, you begin to understand that exclusion wears many faces, some smiling, some silent. But silence is never neutral. The quote was shared over 10,000 times within the hour. Jordan watched it unfold from his penthouse office, overlooking a skyline that suddenly felt smaller than it used to. Lisa, his chief of staff, entered with her iPad in one hand and her jaw set with urgency. We just got a call from the mayor's office, she said. They're requesting a meeting, probably trying to contain the political fallout. Jordan nodded. Set it for Friday. Also, she continued, 3 employees from other luxury restaurants have come forward. What happened at Vivre? Blanc isn't an isolated case. They're calling it the invisible velvet rope. Discreet discrimination hidden in plain sight. Jordan didn't respond right away. He stood, walked to the window and looked down at the street below where Teslas, taxis, and tourists passed beneath banners proclaiming the city's commitment to inclusion. The irony wasn't lost on him. Tell them I want names, he said. If it's systemic, we trace the network. By 3 p.m., A coalition of entrepreneurs announced a task force dedicated to auditing upscale establishments for bias, reservation patterns, service behavior, incident logs. Vivre Blanc had become the catalyst, the first tile tipped. But now, an entire industry was shaking under the pressure. At 5:45 p.m., Jordan received a call from Richard Langley, patriarch of the Langley estate and uncle to Veronica, who had yet to show her face publicly since the night she was removed from Table 3. "You've made your point," Langley said, his voice smooth but sharp. "You've humiliated good people, solid businesses. Let's talk about dialing it back before this turns into a crusade." Jordan responded with only 2 words, "It is a crusade," and then he hung up. Meanwhile, inside Vivre Blanc itself, a different kind of transformation was underway. The staff had been called in for a private meeting. No suits, no customers, just truth. Jordan stood in the center of the empty dining hall, the tables stripped bare, the lights dimmed to something intimate and honest. The employees gathered, servers, hosts, kitchen staff, janitorial crews, many of whom had been silent. Witnesses for years. "Some of you have seen what's been happening," Jordan began. "Some of you lived through it, and some of you benefited from staying quiet." He paused, letting the weight of that truth settle. "I'm not here to punish anyone who feared for their job, but the culture of this place ends today. From now on, you don't report to people who think image is more important than integrity. You report to leaders who know what it means to be overlooked and overqualified at the same time." A young black server named Isaiah raised his hand. "Are we safe saying something now? I've been passed up for promotion twice. First time I complained, I got scheduled on closing shifts for 3 months straight." Jordan looked him in the eye. "Doris, you're safe, and as of now, you're promoted. Head of guest relations, effective immediately." The room exhaled like a balloon untied. Another hand went up, then another. Stories poured out, some whispered, some raw, all real. It wasn't just a meeting, it was a confession booth for a workforce that had been surviving, not thriving. And for the first time, they weren't just being heard, they were being believed. By the end of the week, Jordan had rolled out a formal policy across all his ventures. AI-assisted reservation tracking to monitor for bias patterns, anonymous internal reporting systems, and equity-focused training with oversight from third-party ethics boards. The media called it radical, competitors called it reckless, but customers called it right. And then, perhaps most shockingly, came the call from Veronica herself. She didn't lead with an apology. She led with calculation. "My family wants to make this go away. We'll donate, we'll publicly support your reforms. We'll even pull out of our silent investments if needed. Just stop dragging our name." Jordan listened, then replied, "Your name isn't being dragged, it's being revealed. And maybe it's time people see what's behind the smile." She didn't respond. She simply ended the call. But it didn't matter, the dominoes were falling faster now. Other industries, fashion, tech, publishing, began facing their reckoning as stories surfaced from employees who'd been inspired by the fallout at Vivre Blanc. Alina, ever the academic, was invited to speak at a global ethics conference. She declined the podium. Instead, she submitted a paper titled Table 3, a case study on silent power and the geography of disrespect. It was accepted within hours. The story had grown beyond them now, and Jordan knew it. He hadn't just disrupted a restaurant. He had cracked open a system, and though the road ahead would be lined with resistance, he understood what all revolutions begin with. One person being told they didn't belong and refusing to stand quietly by the kitchen. 1 week later, the wisteria hanging outside, Vivre Blancs had started to bloom again, though this time it felt less like a backdrop for wealth and more like a witness to change. The restaurant's signage remained, but the energy had shifted subtly but irrevocably. Gone were the icy stares of exclusion, the performative smiles that once greeted only the right kind of guests. In their place was something quieter, but far more powerful, Awareness, responsibility, and a fragile hope being carefully assembled like crystalware on linen. That Friday evening, as the sun spilled molten gold across the polished pavement, a black SUV with tinted windows pulled to the curb. No valet stepped forward. No flashbulbs popped. But for those who watched, there was no mistaking the gravity of the moment. Dr. Alina Moore had returned, not to protest, not to confront, but to dine. She stepped out wearing ivory silk, her curls cascading down her shoulders, a warm bronze shimmer to her skin catching the light. She wore no statement jewelry, no logos, no dramatic red lip to command the room. She didn't need any of it. Her presence was the command. Beside her, Jordan exited the SUV in a slate gray suit, his hand naturally sliding into hers, as they approached the doors together. The same doors that had once framed her humiliation now opened with reverence. Waiting just inside was Isaiah, now in a sleek black blazer embroidered with the restaurant's crest, head of guest relations, and the man who once asked if it was safe to speak. His smile now was different, not submissive, not exaggerated, just real. "Dr. Moore," Isaiah said, voice steady but full of something reverent. "Mr. Moore, welcome back to Vivre Blanc. Your table is ready." Alina inclined her head slightly. "Thank you, Isaiah." She didn't overplay it. She didn't need to. Every eye in the entryway followed her as she stepped inside, not because of curiosity this time, but out of respect. The staff stood straighter. Conversations softened, and the power of her return washed over the space like a tide reclaiming its shoreline. As she and Jordan walked through the main hall, no one stopped them. No one tried to intercept with empty apologies or rehearsed smiles. The table by the window, the infamous Table 3, sat unoccupied, dressed in white linen, framed by soft candlelight and a fresh bouquet of white peonies. But it wasn't just a table anymore. It was a symbol, a chapter, a scar, a promise. Isaiah pulled out her chair, Jordan's hand brushing the back of hers as she sat. "This time," Jordan said quietly, taking his seat across from her, "you lead the conversation." She smiled, faintly, not in triumph but in reflection. "Let's see if the room is ready to listen." Their server approached, a young woman named Natalie who had been working at the restaurant for just over a year. She moved with visible nervousness, but her voice held a different tone than before. "It's an honor to serve you both," she said, placing the menus down with delicate care. "Chef Amari asked me to let you know. Tonight's menu is inspired by women who lead without needing to raise their voice." Alina raised her brows, the edges of her lips lifting. "That's, quite a theme." Natalie blushed, then nodded. "He said you'd understand." Outside the tall windows, the city pulsed gently beneath dusk, and for the first time, Alina felt herself relax, not because justice had been served entirely, but because she had been seen, heard, and returned on her terms. Around her, she could sense it, the shift in the room's gaze. People weren't looking at her with skepticism or confusion. They weren't wondering why she was here. They knew now. And more than that, they were questioning why they had never asked the same of themselves. A couple at the next table nodded respectfully. A woman at the bar mouthed, "Thank you. Not for drama, not for spectacle, but for a story that gave voice to every silent exclusion they had endured behind silk and glass and so-called sophistication." As their meal arrived, dishes named after revolutionary women from across continents, Alina leaned into the conversation with Jordan, but she couldn't ignore the emotions coursing under her composure. Her mind replayed that first day, standing in a white dress, being dismissed, her name erased, her dignity bartered away for someone else's comfort. Now here she was, same woman, same name, same elegance, but no longer someone they could displace without consequence. This wasn't revenge, this was reclamation, and reclamation didn't need anger to burn, it needed presence to endure. Halfway through dinner, Isaiah approached again, this time not with wine, but with a small black envelope. "We had this framed," he said, carefully placing it on the table. Thought it should belong to you. Inside was a printout of the original reservation confirmation from that infamous day, time-stamped, archived, and now mounted behind glass. Alina stared at it for a long moment. Then, with care, she set her fork down, took the frame in her hands, and smiled. Slowly, quietly. Proof, she said softly, that sometimes history has a receipt. Jordan chuckled, lifting his glass. To the table, he said. Not just this one, but every one that will never again be taken from someone because they don't fit the room. They clinked glasses, but the toast echoed far beyond their table. It was a celebration, yes, but also a declaration. Behind them, the wall that once featured portraits of French vineyards now bore a new installation. A black and white photograph of a woman seated in profile at a restaurant table, her face turned toward the light, her posture unbending. The plaque beneath it read, Table 3, where elegance redefined the rules. Staff whispered about it, guests asked who the woman was, and the owners said nothing. They didn't need to. The room already knew. And when the check came, it arrived in a gold-trimmed envelope with no total printed, just a note. On behalf of every future guest who will never again be told they don't belong, thank you. Jordan tucked it away without comment. Alina stood slowly, with poise, and the room followed instinctively, staff straightening, guests turning, not out of fear, but reverence. She walked out the same doors that had once marked her exit in shame. But this time the wind was different. The city felt warmer, the flowers seemed fuller, and her story, etched into the bones of a table once denied, was now the story of an empire changed forever. Because sometimes, history doesn't happen in courtrooms or capitals. Sometimes it happens over dinner. The following Monday, a breeze swept through the city like the exhale of something released, something old and suffocating, finally uprooted. Vivre Blanc opened its doors under a new rhythm, one that didn't just shine silverware or recite specials in French, but measured integrity by action. The reservation desk now stood behind a digital kiosk, one linked directly to a cloud-based verification system, each booking encrypted, each seating change logged, time-stamped, transparent. The hostess, once tasked with silently enforcing invisible lines, now operated with clarity. Her name was Maya, and she wore her natural curls like a crown. She had once been told to smile more, dress softer, and code switch to match the clientele. But today she stood in a navy blazer embroidered with a gold emblem that read, Equity is the new luxury. Inside, the layout had shifted too. Not drastically. No one moved walls. But the floor plan is now centered around visibility. No more hidden tables by the service doors. Lighting was adjusted to feel intimate, not exclusive. The menu had been rewritten, not just in flavor, but in acknowledgement. Each section featured a note. This course is inspired by cultures whose food shaped the world, but whose names were too often left off the reservation list. It was bold and deliberate, because Vivre Blanc no longer feared discomfort. It welcomed it, held space for it. And most important of all, the people returning were not the ones who had once ruled the space through entitlement. They were the ones who had long avoided it, who now stepped in not as exceptions, but as patrons. Behind the scenes, change had rippled even further. The restaurant's hiring policy, once vague and favoring fit, had been audited and restructured with blind screenings and community outreach. Isaiah, now officially promoted to Director of Guest Experience, had implemented weekly staff dialogues, a space for grievances, suggestions, and ideas. And at the top of it all was Jordan Moore, not as a silent investor anymore, but as an architect of a new standard. He didn't micromanage. He led with clarity, surrounded himself with voices different from his own, and kept his presence visible and accountable. His name had begun circulating in the hospitality world, not just as a mogul but as a disruptor. Not everyone approved, but no one could ignore him. As for Alina, her return to campus was met with quiet applause. Students who once admired, Her from a distance now stopped her in corridors to say, "I saw the article," or "Thank you for speaking when others wouldn't." She smiled graciously but deflected attention because she had never intended to be the symbol of a movement. She had simply refused to vanish. Her guest lecture, originally titled Ethics in Emerging Systems, was renamed by the university, The Geography of Power. Whose table is it anyway? Attendance tripled. She didn't speak of her own story until the end. It wasn't just about a seat, she said. It was about how quickly a system will displace a person if they don't conform to the unspoken aesthetic of belonging. But what we forget is, standards are not eternal. They are chosen. And we can choose better ones. And they had, because beyond the polished walls of Vivre Blanc, other dominoes had fallen. In Seattle, a luxury spa revamped its intake forms after a client cited a viral clip from Alina's interview. In Atlanta, a jazz lounge quietly changed its dress code after facing backlash for disproportionately turning away natural hairstyles. And in New York, an upscale hotel with a history of overbooking guests of color quietly introduced bias detection software into its booking engine. No press release, just a shift, just accountability. That was how revolution happened sometimes. Not in fire, but in form. Late one evening, Jordan stood in the now liberated main dining hall of Vivre Blanc. The last guests had gone. The lights were dimmed to a soft amber glow, casting shadows that looked more like stories than darkness. He ran a finger along the edge of table 3, now permanently labeled on the reservation map as Dr. Moore's table. Not in ownership, but in legacy. He didn't need applause, he didn't want a plaque on the wall. He wanted this, a room where everyone knew that the seat wasn't a gift, it was a right. Alina entered a moment later, her heels soft against the wood floor, her expression unreadable. She moved beside him, taking in the silence. "I thought I'd hate coming back here," she murmured. "But instead, it feels like I finally own the silence." Jordan turned to her. "Not own," he said. "You rewrote it." Together they stepped onto the terrace where the city's heartbeat throbbed in distant traffic and faraway conversations. She leaned against the railing, the air crisp, stars blinking like quiet witnesses above them. "Do you think it'll last?" she asked. Jordan was quiet for a moment. "It'll evolve, some will resist, some will perform, but enough will remember. And that's all you need to shift the axis." A moment passed. "It started with you," he added. "One name on a ledger, one woman who didn't back down." She smiled, not for him but for herself. "I didn't need to win the argument," she said. "I just needed the room to admit it was wrong." Inside, the staff gathered their belongings. The new sous chef, a Vietnamese woman named Lin, who had never felt comfortable applying to places like this until last week, left a note on the counter that read, "Thank you for building a room that finally fits me." Alina glanced through the window and saw it. She said nothing, but the corner of her mouth twitched just slightly. Jordan reached into his coat, pulled out a fresh folder. Proposals, expansion plans, requests from 3 other cities asking how to replicate the Vivre Blanc transformation. "It's starting," he said. "People want the blueprint." She looked down at the folder, then up at the horizon. "Then give them one," she replied. "But make sure they understand. The standard isn't the table. It's the courage to stand beside it, even when they're told they don't belong." As the night deepened, the city began to quiet. But inside one restaurant, rebuilt from legacy, from error, from fire, there stood a woman and a man beside the table that once tried to erase her. Not in victory, in vindication. And outside that glass, the world, watching, listening, learning, began to draw their lines, not around who belonged, but around what would no longer be tolerated. Because from that night forward, the standard had changed, and it bore her name. Thank you for joining us on this powerful journey of dignity, courage, and transformation. If this story moved you, made you think, or reminded you of something you've experienced or witnessed. Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your voice. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next story that just might change how you see the world. Until then, stay brave, stay kind, and never be afraid to reclaim your seat at the table. See you next time.